Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of So You Think You Know the Red Sox with Bernie Stroum. This is Bernie Stroum, and it is Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. So here we go. Another show. Last Sunday, we postponed our first show ever. I was not feeling well, so we were going to do 1979 last week. Let's do 1979 today. 1979 was a year that had significance in my personal life, since that was the year in the Labor Day weekend, 1979, I moved from Boston to Los Angeles and spent the next 17 years in Los Angeles, California. And this was the last Red Sox season that I lived in Boston. And I was 28 years old, lots of responsibilities. I was homeowner, married, a lot of work to do. Didn't go to Fenway Park that much, but I still followed the Red Sox. And the 1979 Red Sox did not suffer an historic collapse like this, obviously, 78 did. And they did not lose a dramatic playoff game, but they did not create the kind of ending that would be replayed for generations either. Instead, they did something that may have been almost as frustrating. They won 91 games, produced one of the most powerful offensive attacks in baseball, featured several future Hall of Famers, and still finished a distant third, which was typical for the Boston Red Sox. And I was getting used to that ever since the 67 season finished. As I take a sip of coffee, I hope you all are enjoying your Sunday morning, August 9th. This is the story of the 1979 Red Sox. Begins in the winter of 78. The disappointment of 1978 was still fresh when the Red Sox began preparing for the new season. Boston had won 99 games, but had been caught by the Yankees after holding a large summer lead. The season ended with a 5-4 loss at Fenway Park in the American League playoff game. Obviously, that's the Bucky Dent game we went over last time. The club returned in 79 with most of its powerful lineup intact. Jim Rice was coming off his MVP season. Fred Lynn remained one of baseball's finest all-around players, and Kai Yastrzemski was approaching two major career milestones. As I check my notes here, Carlton Fisk, Dwight Evans, Rick Burleson, Jerry Remy, George Scott, Butch Hobson were all familiar members of a veteran team, but the pitching staff had changed. Tiant was gone. He'd signed with the dreaded New York Yankees. Bill Lee's often stormy relationship with Zimmer finally came to an end when Lee was traded to Montreal for the famous Stan Pappy. Then that left Dennis Eckersley, Mike Torres, and Bob Stanley as the most important pitchers on the staff that would have to support one of the best lineups in baseball. Carlton Fisk was also dealing with a painful right elbow injury that year, and that problem was caused by calcium deposits in scar tissue. Fisk would appear in only 91 games in 79, which was a big problem, and just 35 of them as catcher. Gary Allison would handle most of the catching duties that year. That Carlton Fisk, and Don Zimmer was coming back as the manager, hoping his team could forget about the disappointment of 78. I liked Don Zimmer. Don Zimmer wasn't one of the most popular managers in Boston history, but I liked him. He won a lot of games for the Red Sox. Well, let's start with April. The season opened at Fenway Park, as I'm checking the notes, on April 5th against the Indians. Dennis Eckersley took the mound for Boston and pitched the Red Sox to a 7-1 victory in front of 34,000 fans, which, of course, for the last 11 and a half seasons had been packing Fenway Park ever since the 67 season. Red Sox has always been a hard ticket, and it is now in 2026 as their big comeback They were 15 games behind the 2026 Yankees just a few weeks ago, and now they've caught them. They're just about a half game behind. The Red Sox split the next 4 games, but the offense soon began to come alive here in April. On April 12th in Milwaukee, Boston won a wild 12-10 game. 3 days later, they returned and crushed Cleveland at home 14-4. And beginning on April 19th, which is always a 11 a.m. game in Boston, so that people can file out of the game in time to watch the end of the Boston Marathon, Boston won 7 consecutive games. The Red Sox beat Milwaukee, swept 3 games from Kansas City, and then swept 3 more from Seattle, sort of what they're doing now. By the end of the Seattle series, Boston record was 12 wins and 4 losses. The Red Sox cooled off slightly during the final 4 games of the month, but they still finished April with a record 13-7 and stood in first place in the American League East. After everything that had happened the previous September, it was an encouraging sign as far as I was concerned. The Red Sox are once again scoring runs in bunches. Rice and Lynn were in the middle of the lineup. Rick Burleson and Remy were setting the table, and Yastrzemski remained a dangerous presence, even though he was getting older. He was 40 years old. He became 40 in 1979. Unfortunately, there's another team in the American League. The Baltimore Orioles were beginning to emerge as the team Boston was going to have to battle in 79. In May, the Orioles began to pull ahead. The Red Sox continued to play winning baseball. They swept Oakland in a 3-game series at Fenway Park, and on May 15th, they defeated Baltimore 3-2. Their record was 22-11. Boston looked like they were ready to challenge for another division championship, but the warning signs were developing, as my notes say here. The Red Sox had trouble against the strongest division rivals. They lost 2 of 3 to the Yankees at Fenway and lost 2 of 3 in Baltimore. They followed that by losing 3 or 4 games on a road trip in Toronto and Texas. And Boston finished May with a 27-19 record that was still very good, but the Red Sox had dropped into second place 2 games behind the Orioles. The club was also receiving little production from George Scott. He was 35 years old. He was towards the end of his career, and he was struggling at the plate. Red Sox had utilized Scott in the beginning of his career for some good seasons, but traded him away. Milwaukee Brewers got the advantage of some of his best seasons after he was traded. Scott was only hitting .224 with 4 home runs in 45 games, and the Red Sox needed another bat. And that's when June rolled around and the trade started. June would be Boston's best month of the season. The Red Sox began the month by winning 8 of their first 10 games. They scored 13 runs against Texas, 12 against Minnesota, 11 against Kansas City. And on June 13th, the organization made 2 moves, 2 trades. As I check the notes here, as I make sure I get them right, George Scott was traded to the Kansas City Royals for outfielder Tom Poquette. They could put him next to Stan Pappy, who they got for Bill Lee. Can you imagine turning Bill Lee and George Scott into Stan Pappy and Tom Poquette? Anyway, that's what happened. Bill Lee went on to have several good seasons with Montreal, but George Scott was pretty much done. On the same day, Boston acquired veteran first baseman Bob Watson from the Houston Astros. The Red Sox sent pitcher I don't remember, Pete Ladd in cash and a player to be named later. And I remember Bobby Sproul. He was the player to be named later, but he wasn't anything. That was a good trade because Watson was still a productive player. Excuse me. Watson was 33 years old, but could still hit. He immediately gave the Red Sox dangerous right-handed bat, which they needed. Watson would hit .337 with 13 home runs and 53 runs batted in during his 84 games with Boston. That was a good trade. Red Sox kept winning from June 20th through June 24th. They won 5 straight games. My notes say here, the month ended with 2 close victories at Yankee Stadium on the 29th and 30th. The Red Sox beat the Yankees by identical scores of 3-2, and Boston finished June with a record of 20 wins and only 8 losses. Their overall record was 20 games above 500, 47-27. And like a lot of Red Sox teams of that decade, the Red Sox were clearly one of the best teams. Unfortunately, the Orioles were playing even better than they were. The month of July began. There was a major loss. On July 1st, at Yankee Stadium, and there's pictures of this all over the internet. You can check it out. Jerry Remy attempted to score and was thrown out at home plate. During the play, Remy caught his spikes, injured his left knee, and had to be helped from the field. By the way, he never played to the same level of competence after that injury. That injury essentially ended his career, as he had to retire early from knee problem. I don't know if today he would do better with the better surgical procedures, but that pretty much finished him. Remy was having an excellent season. He was batting .300, giving Boston speed at the top of the lineup and good defense at second base. The injury sent Remy on the disabled list for the first time in his career. He had appeared only briefly during the remainder of the season. He finished that year hitting .297 in 80 games. Without Remy, Red Sox were faced with the combination of the infamous Stan Pappy, Jack Brohammer, and a guy I have no memory of, Larry Wolf. And later, the Red Sox got Ted Sizemore, who I am familiar with. Sizemore was a good all-around player, but certainly wasn't Jerry Remy. Boston recovered from the injury by sweeping Kansas City at Fenway and winning 6 of 9 games on a West Coast trip. The Red Sox reached the All-Star break with several players receiving national recognition. Fred Lynn, Jim Rice, Kari Yastrzemski were starters on the All-Star team. Burleson, Stanley were reserves. And on July 24th, an important milestone in Kari Yastrzemski's career occurred, facing Oakland pitcher Mike Morgan in Fenway Park. Yaz hit a 7th-inning home run into the right field stands. It was his 400th of his career, and I can remember that vividly on television. I was watching TV, most of these games on TV. Like I said, I had to get up early, go to work in the morning. There wasn't really time to go to Fenway Park and enjoy myself like I had as a teenager. It was his 400th career home run. Yastrzemski became only the 18th player at the time to reach 400 home runs, and the Red Sox won 7-3. Following night, Red Sox scored 16 runs against Oakland, but that month didn't end well. The Red Sox lost 3 straight games to Cleveland, and they finished July with around a .500 record, 15-13. Overall mark of 62-40, which was really good because it was over 600 winning percentage. But the Orioles were still in first place. They were tough to catch that year. The Red Sox began August by winning 5 of the first 7 games. On August 5th in Milwaukee, Boston swept a doubleheader, 7-2 in the first game, then scored 19 runs in the second game, and then they returned to Fenway Park to score 12 runs against Cleveland on August 7th, 12 against Minnesota on the 14th, and 9 more against the Twins on the 15th. They sure could hit. After defeating Chicago on the 16th, Boston's record was 30 games above 500, 74-44. Unbelievable, but believe it or not, they still weren't in first place. Baltimore was still comfortably ahead. The Red Sox lost 2 straight to Minnesota, were swept in a 3-game series by Kansas City, and then lost another game in Chicago and was shut out by Texas. Boston went 4-9 over the final 13 games in August, and by the end of the month, they'd fallen into 3rd place behind Baltimore and Milwaukee. Couldn't believe how good they played and how far they had fallen. The pattern was clear. Boston could overwhelm weaker teams with hitting, but Boston was not playing well enough against the good teams they needed to beat. Their pitching lacked consistency. A Baltimore staff and injuries to Fisk and Remy had weakened the team, particularly in those 2 important positions up the middle. September rolled around. As I take another sip of my coffee here, we're going to run a little bit over our 15 minutes today. This was a interesting season, even though they did not contend for the pennant. September began, and it was like a lot of Red Sox Septembers. It was disastrous. The Red Sox lost the first two games to Texas, then lost 2 or 3 at Yankee Stadium. Returning home, they lost 3 to Baltimore. Over the first 9 days of September, the Red Sox lost 8 of 9 games and lost any realistic chance of catching Baltimore. But the season was about to produce one of its greatest moments. Carl Yastrzemski entering September 12th with 2,999 career hits. Excuse me, something in my throat today. The previous night, 34,000 people showed up, but he didn't get that 3,000 hit. But on September 12th, against Jim Beatty of the Yankees in the 8th inning, he lined a single to right field, hit number 3,000. The game stopped. His teammates poured onto the field. He became the 15th player in Major League history to collect 3,000 hits and the first player in American League history to combine 3,000 hits with at least 400 home runs. It was a great accomplishment for a player to spend his entire career with the Red Sox and had carried the Red Sox through both difficult years and championship seasons, and I had watched the whole thing. I'd seen him his entire career. Red Sox won that game 9-2, and September was interesting, not because they were out of the race, but there were other milestones in September. 3 days later, Bob Watson on the 15th of September in Baltimore hit for the cycle. Having previously hit for the cycle with Houston, Watson became the first player in Major League history to accomplish that feat in both leagues. Boston played better in the final 2 weeks. They always ended the season well, even if they choked early. Won 6 of the final 9 games, reached 90 victories on September 28th, and they were once again, the 1979 Red Sox, as my notes say here, finished the season with 91 wins, 69 losses, only for 160 games. They had 2 rainouts, didn't need to be played because they finished third in the American League East. With 91 wins, they finished 11 and a half games behind the Orioles, finished several games behind the second place Milwaukee Brewers. They were only the third best team. If you review the numbers of the season, the final statistics show how talented they really were. Fred Lynn won the American League batting championship, hitting .333. He had 39 home runs, drove in 122 runs, scored 116 times, and had a .637 slugging percentage, which led the league in slugging. Jim Rice was almost as good, hit .325, 201 hits, 39 home runs, 130 runs batted in. Lynn and Rice combined for total 78 home runs and 252 RBIs. Even Yastrzemski, at age 39, he had yet to reach 40. He would before the year ended. Hit .270 with 21 home runs and 87 RBIs. Pretty good year for a 39-year-old. Hobson added 28 home runs, 93 runs batted in. Dwight Evans, I think, who belongs in the Hall of Fame, hit 21 homers. And Rick Burleson collected 174 hits and played strong defense at shortstop. As a team, the Red Sox batted .283 with 194 homers and 841 runs. On the mound, Dennis Eckersley, and we didn't talk much about their pitchers. Eckersley was the ace of the staff, 17-10 with a .299 ERA, 17 complete games. Torres won 16 games, and 2 minor pitchers. Steve Renko won 11, Dick Drago won 10, along with 13 saves. Boston played great in Fenway Park, 51-29 at Fenway Park, but only 40-40 on the road, and went just 5-8 against Baltimore and New York, teams they needed to win against. And that's probably why they finished third. Some final thoughts I have, and then we'll wrap it up. It's easy to overlook the 79 Red Sox. They didn't win the division. They did not reach the postseason. They did not suffer any unforgettable final day heartbreaks like in 78, but they were an exceptionally entertaining baseball team. Fred Lynn, Jim Rice, were at the height of their powers. Dennis Eckley is in one of his finest seasons as a starting pitcher, and Bob Watson arrived in June and became an immediate force in the lineup. Most importantly, Red Sox fan witnessed Yastrzemski's 400th home run and 3,000th hit. The team won 91 games. Total would qualify for the Red Sox won 91 games, a total that would qualify them mostly for the postseason in some years. But 79 was not one of them. There were no wild cards. You had to win the division. Baltimore won 102 games. Milwaukee won 95. Boston's 91 victories were only good for third place. In many ways, 79 represented the final peak of the Red Sox team that had grown out of the 75 pennant winners. The pieces were still there. The names were familiar. The offense was frightening. But time was beginning to move forward. Things are going to change. Next week, we're going to do 1980. This was the story of the 79 Red Sox. 1980, new guys showed up, and the 1980s were much different than the 1970s. I'm Bernie Stroum, and this has been another edition of You Think You Know the Red Sox. Join us next Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern for the 1980 season. And until then, I want to thank you for listening. And remember, tonight we do a special Diamonds and Dice podcast with Beatles Eternally. If you're interested, I interview Beatles, find out why he decided that it was time for a break in his YouTube broadcasting. Anyway, thank you all very much for tuning in, and we'll see you tonight or the next time we stream. Have a nice day.